Laden Milkmaidens by Frocto. Chapter 2 Interlewd. The Backstory. Once upon a time, you and your girls had experienced your fair share of doubts about opening the Ponyville milk barn. As much as you ran a tight ship, the business proposition had been a hard sell at first. Ponyville folk had taken a little while to trade in drinking milk from the udders of cows in the field, and instead sampling it straight from the colossal heaving titties that teasingly jiggled under a pony's naughty cowgirl outfit. But it was hard to look back on those early days with anything but fondness. Cozy evenings indoors with your three girlfriends, slowly and carefully discovering the milk-giving capabilities of their bodies. Love confessions interspersed with torrid moos and full-body orgasms. You wouldn't ever think to trade any of it away, and neither would your cows. Bouncy Babseed, full-figured Fluttershy, and poochy-pudged Pinky. We now present for your entertainment ye draught of knowledges ancient, poured from thy cloistered archives of Ponyville's historical society. Thine little-known beginnings of Ponyville Milk Barn, a gripping tale of babes both business-minded and boisterously busty. It had taken a lot of hard work to get the business off the ground. And not just from you. Sure, you'd done your part by handling the money and repairing seasonal wear and tear to the barn over the years, but it went without saying that the girls were the real stars of the show. You still remembered how Pinky had donned her collar in the most undeniably her way possible. With a cry of, "Here goes nothing!" she slapped it on right away, and what happened next had taken your breath clean away. As the stallion end of the collar's buckle threaded the mare's end, Pinky had spent a long moment standing stock still in the middle of your living room. The pink mare had closed her eyes and slowed her breathing as almost all color drained from her cheeks. After some 30 seconds of silence, nature had just taken its course. The curvy pinkette had straightened her back, sucked in a great big gulp of air, and then let loose an incredible, earth-shaking moo of pure bliss. It had carried on, echoing back and forth across Ponyville, making amorous couples suddenly race to their bedrooms, and a chorus of sympathetic moos rise up from her own kind grazing in the fields. Grass grew and flowers bloomed. Her natural flat expression had turned into a smile, and then an eyes wide and mouth hanging open look of pure bliss. Pinky had barely even noticed you creeping your hands up her chest to rub them directly. She'd mooed for almost 2 whole minutes, like she couldn't have stopped herself if she wanted to. Pinky had curled her soft, kissable lips into the shape of an O, as she continued to moan out moo after moo. The knots and split ends of her wonderful hair had straightened out and repaired themselves, and her already generous body fat levels had shot up considerably, although mostly in a few select places, of course. Booby and tummy flesh had oozed out of every corner of her small pink dress, bulging the shoulder straps and quaking pendulously over her lower neckline. The garment would have been knee-length, on less overly endowed ponies, but they barely made this one's thighs. Before the mooing was even over, the polyester stretches across her bosom and gut had been reduced to spiderweb of fragments with tons of pink flesh peeking out between them. By the time the intense pressure on her chest had finally forced her into silence, what remained of her poor, abused dress was literally creaking around her curves. From there, one small, tit-wobbling breath was all it had taken to reduce her entire outfit to tatters on the floor. The slightest movement was now enough to send her breasts swaying gently for 5 seconds or more, and if she ever tried to run, she'd almost certainly give herself a slap in the face. Every wiggle, every wobble sent muffled clapping noises rippling through her breasts, their own great size and weight working to dim the sound of her honkers slapping together. It was tits as far as the eye could see in there, massive expanses of creamy pink flesh laid out for display, going far beyond what her frame should reasonably be able to support. Pinky had followed right after, landing amidst the tatters on all fours. With a greedy lick of her newly chubbed chops, the tubby pony had padded her way over towards you, leaving a glistening trail of sex-sleeve juices along the floorboards behind her. And as for Fluttershy's first time, that had required even more boldness. She'd popped in the door in a minuscule pair of shorty shorts, so small they looked painted onto her, designed for boys rare, and a shirt that did little at all to cover up her tantalizing chest. Old Flutes had taken one look at Pinky rolling around on the floor, cute cowtail in the air. She'd almost vacated the premises right then and there, without any of a dozen rabbit-feeding excuses on her lips. It was only the promise of more jiggling, bouncing, and growing bigger that had kept her hooves firmly planted on the ground. How much bigger? She'd asked, drawing horny circles on the top of her melons with her fingertips. She'd leaned forward and said in little more than a tiny whisper, painfully aware, as she was, that she had the heaviest rack in Ponyville, and more growth was completely insane. Boys already want bigger dicks, even if they've already got the biggest, like you do, so I'm not being that greedy, right? I'm not obsessed with big titties. In the end, she was a good girl who had laid back and let the magic happen. For as long as you lived, you'd never forget the sight of Fluttershy timidly tightening her cow collar around her neck for the first time, with no idea what was going to happen to her. The pink-haired beauty had reclined as she tried her best to silence all the thoughts in her head. That was the trouble with growing up. She just couldn't de-stress anymore. Not when there was always so much to worry about. To think this might be the end of that was just breathtaking. She laid her hands across her toned, flat tummy, let out a cute little moo, and then waited. "Please take good care of your dairy cow," she'd whispered. Fluttershy's shirt was already skin-tight, the white fabric revealing her lacy white bra, which was already beginning to buckle. The straps felt like they dug into her back a little bit more as her breath came just a little heavier. She'd felt a little heavier in general, really. It only helped her sink into the chair even further, however. Fluttershy had tried to swim her way back up, but only to end up relaxed and reclined, legs splayed out as she sighed in contentment. And then Fluttershy had undergone quite a bit of flushing, rushing, amazing growth. As the Pegasi's breasts expanded, a tear had slowly begun to make its way up from the hem of her shirt all the way to her collar. Fluttershy's hands shot up, rising to her chest with obvious panic in her eyes. This smutty slogan shirt was one of her favorites, a cute piece she simply adored wearing around Ponyville. Her fingertips danced across the contours of her expanding rack until the two came together and Fluttershy's bust began to swallow up her fingers. Not because she'd brought her hands down to it, of course, but rather because her growing bosom had risen, like bread in the oven, to fill the awestruck pony's grasping palms. Fluttershy clutched her breasts. What pony wouldn't when faced with such a nice pair? "Oh dear," she murmured as that tearing sound only got louder in her ears. Then, abruptly, Fluttershy's growth came to a stop. The pinkette with the newly formed mega rack sagged, assuming the collar had finally finished its diabolical work upon her body. She let out a great exhale of relief, which turned out to be the last thing she should be doing. Taking a break now wasn't one bit advisable, not when her bra was breathing its last. All this time, Fluttershy's growing breasts had gradually been filling up the teardrop-shaped cups of her immense bra, and now they had finally strained the garment to its maximum size. She whispered as, while her shirt was momentarily spared from being split clean in two, the pony had now found this garment stressing against her flesh. The bra wrapped tight around her heavy chest was being thoroughly menaced by the pony's rapidly expanding rack. At that moment, another moo found its way to the tip of Fluttershy's tongue, so decadent. If she wanted, she could take all the pressure off her chest in a single decadent gasp, reducing both bra and shirt to shreds in the same moment. The pony resisted the urge for just a moment, long enough for the pain of her imprisonment to become niggling, at the frustration of her lack of growing room to become overwhelming. Fluttershy shut her eyes and opened her mouth, letting the naughty word come tumbling out. Moo. With a long, apocalyptic ripping sound heard throughout the house, an extra heavy-duty triple-padded bra with the expansive adjustable straps met its end. With Fluttershy's constant growth only increasing in speed now that the stifling piece of clothing had been found wanting, her pendulous breasts went after her shirt next. With nothing remaining to keep Fluttershy's expansion restricted, her breasts marching deeper and deeper into the cup-sized alphabet, filling up the breezy cloth in a heartbeat. Fluttershy's shirt creaked as it protested its changes. The slogan across her white t-shirt had doubled in length and height, going from dangling loosely off her melons to stretched to billboard sizes. Each rounded orb had grown so large that they pressed together in the middle, and with no more ground to explore there, they grew out and out and out. Fluttershy had panted and moaned and buckled under her massively expanded titties. With a final earth-shattering tear, her t-shirt came apart right down to the middle, depositing her breasts fully out in the open. She looked mostly normal from the neck up, with a pretty face and pouty, soft-looking lips, but after her slender build began, all hell broke loose around the young girl's chest. A girl's shoulder width was usually a nice estimate to how far, at most, her breasts should be allowed to push out exactly. After all, even if her melons were huge enough that they pressed together in the middle to form a cock-squeezing sleeve as good as any pussy, the resultant curves still shouldn't go past her shoulders, right? Well, obviously, Fluttershy hadn't heard anything about that. She had a cleavage line where her tits met in the middle, about a foot long, and in the resultant cascade of titillating female flesh, her stupidly gigantic milkers were sticking out to the sides as far as they could go. Slowly, Fluttershy had dropped to her knees, joining Pinkie Pie in a mooing, happy daze on the floor of your living room. The next few hours to follow were some of the milkiest and bounciest of your entire life. You would never forget what happened when the colors came off the pair's dainty swan necks. As they slowly returned to normal, their mental faculties came back to them, and their engorged bosoms and booties returned slowly to their, still ridiculously large, normal sizes. Next, you'd brought out the 6 10-liter milk canisters the chubby pair had filled together. At first, they'd refused to believe it was real. And that wasn't even taking into account the other produce that day. Milk stains dripping from the walls and the ceiling, the milk filling the bathtub and all the sinks, and 2 very huge, bloated, milk-filled tummies. It was only when the pair's next milk-fueled sex spree was caught on camera that they believed their bodies could produce such a large volumes of milk at such a great speed. As it turned out, all the pair of hyper-curved ponies remembered in retrospect was being happy. Fluttershy in particular said she had been truly relaxed for the first time in a very long while. She was overjoyed. After loving happy cuddly animals for so long, she now got to join their ranks as the biggest, plumpest animal of all, loved and cared for by her doting boyfriend. With being an animal came simpler, nicer thoughts. She was finally able to cast her concern aside and be cheerful and happy, like she was living in the same fluffy cloudland as Pinkie always was. It was like every nagging doubt and fear and concern, her paranoid day-to-day life, had turned into a swarm of butterflies that had just flitted right out of her brain and exited by either ear. When asked to report what they did remember, both girls mentioned vague impressions of playing with another curvy cow like them, and a pleasant pressure on their chests. And there was definitely something about an instinctual quest for a hung mate to create cute calves with. That much was certain. An offhand mention by you of being literally wrestled to the ground and forced to come in them over and over again had Pinkie laughing her ass off, and Fluttershy face down on the floor begging for forgiveness. That had been all the convincing the girls had needed that this was a solid business venture. The next day they'd pooled their funds with yours, and you've embarked on your new life together as a high-producing milk barn. Fluttershy and Pinkie had sunk many months now into servicing the town, sometimes working long hours in unfavorable conditions, but with all the countless hours of sweat, tears, and most of all titty milk, it was finally beginning to pay off. Heck, you'd had to bring Babs on board just to cope with newfound demand, and what a welcoming party that had been. Although, that's a story for another time. Author's note. Full chapter coming tomorrow. My note. Probably not tomorrow, but soon.